At the outset of the war in Ukraine, Russia possessed what appeared to be an overwhelming advantage in the aerial domain. Its aerospace forces, known as the VKS, fielded approximately 780 tactical combat aircraft, a stark contrast to Ukraine's modest fleet of around 125 aircraft. This 5-to-1 numerical superiority, combined with Russia's legacy as a global aerospace power and decades of experience in military aviation, suggested that the Kremlin could achieve rapid air dominance in the conflict's early stages. The Russian Air Force, with its modernized Su-34 fighter bombers, Su-35S air superiority fighters, Su-30 multi-role platforms, and other legacy systems, such as Su-27s and MiG-29s, was designed to project both offensive and defensive air power over contested regions. In theory, this force structure should have allowed Russia not only to establish control over the skies of Ukraine quickly, but also provide persistent close air support for mechanized ground operations, strike critical infrastructure, and deter or eliminate Ukrainian counterattacks with minimal losses. The disparity in numbers, combined with Russia's perceived technical superiority and combat experience in prior conflicts, ranging from Georgia in 2008 to Syria in the mid-2010s, reinforced the expectation that Ukraine would be unable to challenge Russian aerial operations effectively. Analysts and military observers initially projected that within weeks, Russian forces could dominate the Ukrainian airspace, degrade air defenses, and create conditions for a rapid and decisive ground campaign. However, the early months of the war quickly disproved these assumptions. Despite its larger fleet, Russia failed to establish air superiority, and Ukraine's smaller, more agile air force managed to contest the skies effectively. Several factors contributed to this unexpected outcome. First, combat aircraft losses were higher than anticipated due to sustained engagements with Ukrainian air defenses, tactical counterattacks, and innovative use of drones and short-range missile systems. Open-source intelligence confirmed the destruction of numerous aircraft, including frontline Su-34s and Su-35s, highlighting the vulnerability of even modern Russian airframes when facing coordinated offenses. Second, Russia's operational tempo placed extraordinary stress on its aging aircraft. Many of the VKS's tactical airframes were decades old, including legacy Su-27s, early Su-30 variants, and MiG-29s, all which had already accumulated significant flight hours. When pushed beyond their designed operational limits, these aircraft became prone to mechanical failures, further reducing the number of planes available for sustained operations. The overuse of these airframes not only impaired sortie rates, but also exposed structural weaknesses and reliability issues that would later become critical constraints in Russia's ability to maintain a continuous combat presence. Third, logistical and production shortfalls compounded the problem. Russian aircraft manufacturing, heavily dependent on foreign components and specialized precision equipment, struggled to produce replacement aircraft or even repair damaged ones at a rate sufficient to offset losses. Annual production figures for Sukhoi fighter bombers and air superiority jets were far below the attrition rates caused by both combat losses and overuse, creating a widening gap between operational demand and available capacity. By late 2025, these combined pressures had begun to erode Russia's numerical and qualitative advantage in the air. The VKS, once regarded as one of the most formidable air forces globally, now faced the dual challenge of declining aircraft availability and diminishing operational effectiveness. Its initial superiority, grounded in raw numbers and historical technological prowess, had proven insufficient to maintain dominance in protracted and highly dynamic conflict. The failure to achieve air superiority was not merely a tactical setback. It signaled deeper structural vulnerabilities within Russia's aerospace sector. Both military and civilian aviation industries were showing clear signs of systemic decline. Production pipelines were overstretched, supply chains were fractured by sanctions and logistical disruptions, and the workforce faced shortages of skilled engineers and technicians. The inability to sustain the fleet in the air, combined with shortage of new aircraft, meant that Russia could no longer rely on its early advantage to dictate operational outcomes. Instead, the war revealed that the country's military aviation capabilities were approaching a critical threshold where attrition, overuse, and production constraints would soon undermine Russia's ability to project air power reliably over Ukraine or elsewhere. In essence, The initial expectation of swift aerial dominance gave way to a protracted struggle in which Russia's theoretical superiority was undermined by practical limitations, exposing a growing incapacity to sustain prolonged and intensive air operations. The early promise of aerial supremacy had dissipated, leaving the Russian Air Force in a precarious position where strategic goals were increasingly at odds with operational realities, foreshadowing the cascading crises that would envelop both its military and civilian aviation sectors in the years to come. Russian aircraft manufacturing, long considered a cornerstone of the country's military-industrial complex, has faced an unprecedented crisis in recent years, exposing deep vulnerabilities that have now become critical to its war effort. The slowdown in production is not simply a matter of mismanagement or reduced demand. It is largely rooted in Russia's heavy dependence on foreign components, precision tools, and specialized equipment sourced from a network of countries, including Germany, Japan, France, Italy, Taiwan, Sweden, and South Korea. These components are not peripheral. They are essential to maintaining both the structural integrity of aircraft and the precision of advanced avionics systems. For example, factories like Karachevsky Zav Elektrodedel KZ rely on high-accuracy Japanese SODIC electrical discharge machining tools to produce critical parts for military aircraft, missile systems, and air defense platforms. These machines, however, have a finite operational lifespan, and replacements or spare parts can no longer be legally imported due to sanctions that began in April 2023 and expanded in 2024. The looming expiration of this precision equipment threatens to halt production lines entirely, as domestic alternatives remain inadequate to meet the same standards of accuracy and reliability. The implications of the supply chain vulnerability are significant. Russian production targets for military aircraft have consistently fallen short. For instance, Sukhoi Su-34 fighter bombers were produced at only 9 units in 2022, 13 in 2023, and had a target of 17 for 2025. Meanwhile, the Su-35's air superiority fighter faced similar difficulties. 12 were ordered in 2024, but only 10 were delivered, and the 2025 goal of 16 aircraft was unevenly met, indicating systemic delays. Combined with attrition from overuse and combat losses, the Russian Air Force is effectively unable to replace aging or destroyed aircraft at a sustainable pace. Open-source intelligence reports confirm the destruction of dozens of Su-34MS and Su-35s in the conflict, highlighting the growing gap between operational losses and production capabilities. This shortfall is particularly alarming when one considers that Russia produces only around 20 Su-30, Su-34, and Su-35 aircraft per year combined, barely enough to offset attrition without expanding the fleet. As a result, the country is not only failing to grow its air power, but is struggling to maintain its current operational strength. Civilian aviation, which historically has shared facilities, components, and workforce with the military sector, has been even more severely affected. At the start of the war, the Russian government ambitiously planned to procure over 1,000 new civil aircraft for airlines by 2030, aiming to produce 14 in 2022, 25 in 2023, and 69 in 2024. In reality, production has been catastrophic. Only 5 civilian aircraft were completed across 3 years, and by 2025, just 1 out of 15 planned commercial aircraft had been delivered. Western sanctions, particularly those restricting access to engines, avionics, and other critical systems, have forced Russian manufacturers to rely on gray market components, a process that is costly, slow, and unreliable. Projects like the Superjet 100, which use the Franco-Russian Powerjet SAM-146 engines, continue to face mounting reliability challenges, as access to replacement parts is limited and domestic alternatives are not yet ready to fill the gap. Funding cuts further exacerbate the issue, with government allocations for civil aircraft production reduced repeatedly due to delays, manufacturing challenges, and the prioritization of military needs. Sanctions have thus created a dual bottleneck. First, by preventing access to essential foreign components and tools, and second, by making domestic production incapable of replacing or substituting these critical inputs. Russia's attempts at import substitution have produced mixed results at best, leaving factories dependent on obsolete machines and specialized imported parts. The effects cascade through both military and civilian sectors. Tools used in one sector often serve the other, meaning a malfunction or shortage in a single plant can disrupt production across multiple lines. Moreover, production processes are tightly interconnected. Precision metallurgy, avionics assembly, and electronics manufacturing cannot easily be separated or duplicated, which makes the industry extremely sensitive to external shocks and internal inefficiencies. The reliance on foreign expertise compounds the problem. Russian aerospace manufacturing depends not only on machines and components, but also on skilled technicians and engineers capable of operating highly specialized equipment. When these professionals leave for higher paying or safer opportunities abroad, the effect is magnified, slowing production and increasing the likelihood of errors. The result is a crisis in which Russia cannot maintain the rate of aircraft replacement, let alone expand its fleet to meet operational demands. Military aircraft remain in service longer than intended. Civilian aircraft production remains negligible, and the country faces a looming industrial bottleneck that threatens both its domestic aviation infrastructure and its ability to sustain operations in Ukraine. In short, Russian aircraft manufacturing has slowed dramatically because of a convergence of structural weaknesses, international sanctions, and dependence on imported technology. Military production is insufficient to offset attrition. Civilian production has effectively collapsed, and supply chain vulnerabilities create a cascade of operational risks across both sectors. Without significant technological breakthroughs, domestic innovation, or a resolution to sanctions, the aviation industry is facing a production crisis that is likely to intensify, undermining Russia's ability to sustain its military campaigns and maintain internal connectivity across its vast territory. The problem is no longer simply one of quantity. It is systemic, affecting every aspect of aircraft design, production, maintenance, and deployment, and it is unlikely to be resolved in the short term. One of the most critical and underappreciated factors contributing to Russia's aviation crisis is the severe shortage of skilled engineers, technicians, and technical staff across both military and civilian aerospace sectors. For decades, Russia relied on a highly educated workforce trained during the Soviet era, which included specialists in aerodynamics, avionics, propulsion, and material science. These individuals formed the backbone of the country's aerospace industry, providing the expertise necessary to maintain, repair, and design some of the world's most sophisticated aircraft. However, the demographic profile of this workforce is now heavily skewed toward older generations. By 2021, the median age of employees in military manufacturing sectors was 45 years, and only around 16% of the workforce was under 29. This aging Soviet guard possesses immense institutional knowledge, but the lack of younger engineers to supplement or eventually replace them creates a looming talent gap. As older experts retire or reduce their activity, their knowledge often leaves with them, further eroding the industry's human capital. The exodus of younger talent is particularly severe. Many of Russia's most capable engineers and scientists have emigrated over the past 2 decades, motivated by a combination of low salaries, limited research opportunities, political instability, and conscription pressures. High-profile examples include individuals like Alexander Yukhanov, who, after completing his PhD in radio engineering and software in Russia, relocated to the United States and now holds a senior engineering position at a major technology company. Such immigration is not isolated. It reflects a broader trend in which young engineers perceive few opportunities for career growth or adequate compensation within Russia. While the average Russian university professor earns approximately $1,300 per month, a figure that ranks below neighboring countries when adjusted for purchasing power parity, Western and multinational companies offer significantly higher remuneration, career mobility, and access to cutting-edge technology. Consequently, factories and R&D facilities in both civilian and military aviation sectors face chronic understaffing, and attempts to recruit new talent domestically are hampered by insufficient incentives and competition from international employers. The workforce shortage has a direct and compounding impact on production and maintenance capabilities. Russian aviation factories, such as Aviastar in Ulyanovsk and ODKUMPO in Ufa, struggle to fill vacancies in highly specialized roles, including engine assembly, avionics integration, and precision metallurgy. For instance, Aviastar reported a deficit of 2,500 workers in January 2024, which had grown to 3,500 by April 2024. These facilities are responsible for producing both military transport aircraft and components for civilian aviation projects, making workforce gaps particularly damaging. When factories attempt to shift personnel between projects, moving staff from civilian aircraft production to military programs or vice versa, they are not adding capacity but merely redistributing a shrinking talent pool. This juggling act can temporarily prioritize one sector but inevitably reduces efficiency, slows production, and increases the risk of technical errors. For military aircraft, such delays have direct operational consequences, including slow replacement of lost airframes, delayed upgrades, and increased reliance on older aircraft, which are already prone to structural wear and failure. In the civilian sector, the shortage contributes to the near-total collapse of new aircraft production, as projects like the Superjet 100 or MC-21 cannot meet deadlines without sufficient trained personnel. Beyond simple numbers, the workforce crisis also affects innovation and research. Russia's aerospace industry, historically depended on continuous R&D to maintain competitive capabilities in both domestic and export markets. Without a pipeline of young engineers to learn from experienced mentors and eventually take over leadership roles, research programs face stagnation. Innovation requires not only equipment, but also skilled personnel capable of operating advanced machines, developing new avionics, testing prototypes, and integrating complex systems. The loss of both human expertise and the younger generation's creative input slows technological progress, undermines efforts at import substitution, and limits the development of next-generation platforms like the Su-57 or PD-8 engine. Over time, this gap between skill availability and technological demand could render Russia increasingly dependent on outdated aircraft and foreign components, further compounding the systemic crisis. The shortage of skilled labor is also amplified by external pressures, including sanctions, conscription, and the ongoing war effort. Young engineers may emigrate to avoid conscription or seek safer and more stable employment opportunities abroad, further draining the talent pool. At the same time, the military sector often offers higher wages or bonuses to attract workers from civilian projects, effectively pulling talent away from commercial aviation. This creates a vicious cycle. Civilian projects stall due to workforce shortages, while military projects can only maintain limited output and the overall industrial base suffers. Combined with production bottlenecks, aging aircraft, and supply chain constraints, the workforce crisis is a key driver of the broader decline in Russia's aviation industry. In summary, Russia's aerospace sector faces a profound human capital crisis, with an aging workforce, mass immigration of young engineers, and chronic understaffing across both civilian and military factories. Efforts to redistribute workers between projects provide only temporary relief, and the shortage directly impedes production, maintenance, and innovation. Without a significant reversal in workforce trends, through retention of young talent, increased incentives, or strategic recruitment, the industry is likely to continue its downward trajectory, accelerating the collapse of both military and civilian aviation. The workforce crisis, therefore, is not merely a logistical problem. It is a fundamental structural vulnerability that threatens Russia's ability to sustain aircraft production, maintain operational readiness, and compete technologically on a global scale. By 2025, the cumulative pressures of production shortfalls, aging aircraft, workforce deficits, and supply chain vulnerabilities had forced Russia to adopt tactical adaptations that masked, but did not resolve, the deeper structural problems of its aerospace industry. One of the most significant innovations has been the large-scale deployment of glide bombs, or UMPK kits, which convert traditional gravity bombs into standoff, precision-guided munitions capable of gliding up to 40 miles after release. This strategy allows Russian pilots to strike Ukrainian positions while remaining outside the range of much of the country's air defense systems, reducing immediate exposure to anti-aircraft fire. In theory, this adaptation enables Russia to sustain offensive operations while protecting its dwindling pool of aircraft. Hundreds of thousands of UMPK kits have been produced, and sorties employing glide bombs have allowed Russian jets to continue applying destructive pressure on Ukrainian forces despite limitations in aircraft availability. In practice, however, this approach does not address the fundamental problem of airframe exhaustion. Every sortie, even when conducted from standoff range, still involves takeoff, transit, weapons release, and return, cumulatively adding flight hours to aircraft already operating near or beyond their intended lifespans. Older Su-27s, MiG-29s, and early Su-30 variants, many of which comprise more than half of Russia's tactical airframes, are particularly vulnerable, with remaining operational life estimated at 20 to 35%. The reliance on glide bombs, therefore, is a tactical band-aid that mitigates immediate losses but does not prevent the strategic degradation of Russia's air fleet over time. Meanwhile, Ukraine has increasingly targeted the industrial nodes that underpin Russian military aviation, demonstrating the vulnerability of a supply chain already stressed by sanctions and production bottlenecks. Deep strikes against critical factories, such as the Kometa series and the Kazan aviation plant, have damaged or destroyed aircraft and components vital for both glide bomb production and fighter assembly. Ukrainian operations like Spiderweb in mid-2025 showcase capacity to reach key industrial facilities deep inside Russian territory, causing material disruptions, delaying production, and compounding the impact of workforce and supply shortages. Because glide bombs rely on precision guidance modules, specialized electronics, and components produced at a limited number of factories, any disruption in this network has disproportionate consequences, potentially reducing the rate of production by 30 to 40% and limiting Russia's ability to maintain offensive operations. This vulnerability demonstrates the interconnectedness of Russia's aerospace industry. Military and civilian production lines share both equipment and talent, so strikes on one sector ripple through the entire industrial base, affecting overall operational capacity. The crisis in Russia's aviation sector is further exacerbated by the collapse of its arms export market. For decades, Russia was a dominant global supplier of combat aircraft, selling affordable and relatively capable jets to countries across Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. These exports funded research and development for new systems, supported domestic production lines, and helped maintain technological relevance. However, the war in Ukraine, combined with rising competition from China and declining reliability in Russian aircraft performance, has drastically reduced demand for Russian aircraft abroad. China, which previously relied on Russian technology for fighter programs like the Su-30 MKK, has now developed and exported advanced platforms such as the J-20 and J-35, surpassing Russia in both quality and global market reach. Countries that once purchased Russian aircraft, such as India and Egypt, are increasingly turning to Western or Chinese alternatives, further reducing export revenue and the funds available for sustaining domestic production. Without the inflow of foreign income and the prestige associated with a robust export market, Russia's ability to finance technological innovation and maintain its industrial base is severely compromised, creating a feedback loop in which declining production undermines exports, which in turn reduces funding for further production and R&D. By 2026, Russia faces a complex strategic dilemma with no simple solutions. It can attempt to sustain both military and civilian aviation at reduced capacity, risking gradual erosion across both sectors, prioritize one sector over the other, for example by cannibalizing civilian resources to maintain military aircraft, which would preserve warfighting capacity but cripple internal connectivity and economic activity, or allow both sectors to decline toward systemic collapse, jeopardizing operational readiness, industrial integrity, and geopolitical influence. Simultaneously, each path carries significant consequences. Sustaining both sectors at reduced capacity prolongs operational capabilities, but increases the likelihood of catastrophic aircraft failures due to overuse and aging airframes. Prioritizing military aviation would enable Russia to continue offensive operations in Ukraine, but at the cost of economic disruption, grounded civilian fleets, and a loss of domestic mobility across its vast territory. Conversely, focusing on civilian aviation to preserve internal connectivity would effectively concede strategic air superiority, leaving the Russian military unable to expand or even maintain its existing capabilities. There is also a strong likelihood that, in practice, Russia may not make a coherent, long-term strategic choice, but instead drift between these approaches, responding reactively to crises as they arise. This ad hoc management risks further inefficiency and magnifies the likelihood of a slow-motion collapse across 2026 and beyond, with mass flight cancellations, halted production lines, grounded aircraft, and declining sortie rates, all of which undermine Russia's ability to sustain the war effort or maintain its status as a global aerospace power. In sum, the combination of tactical adaptations like glide bombs, industrial vulnerabilities exploited by Ukrainian strikes, the collapse of arms exports, and rising competition from China presents Russia with an acute strategic crisis. The underlying problems, aging aircraft, workforce shortages, supply chain fragility, and production bottlenecks, cannot be solved by short-term measures. By 2026, the country faces an unavoidable reckoning. The slow but inexorable degradation of both military and civilian aviation will shape operational capacity, economic stability, and global influence, highlighting the systemic fragility of Russia's aerospace sector in the context of prolonged conflict and international